On the night of May 18th, 1944, inside a German armored repair park west of Lisieux, Major Erich Mertens stopped in front of a Panther tank and stared at a contradiction. The tank had not burned. It had not been hit. Its tracks were clean enough to move, its armor was unbroken, and there was no shell hole anywhere on the hull. But its turret would not turn, not under power, not by hand, not even when three mechanics put their shoulders against the traverse wheel and cursed until their breath fogged in the cold. A second Panther sat 20 meters away with the same failure. Then a third. 3 tanks, all intact from the outside, all dead in the same place inside. Mertens wrote one sentence at the bottom of his night report that made his commander send the file upward before dawn. He wrote, "We are guarding the vehicle, but not the opening." That opening was the gun barrel, and the thing that had gone through it weighed less than a house key. The British did not need to pierce the Panther's armor. They found the one hole the armor was built around. Then they dropped a weapon through it. To understand why that mattered, you have to understand the arithmetic of 1944. By then, every Allied armored planner knew the ugly truth. A Sherman could be built fast. It could cross oceans. It could be repaired by tired men under canvas with the wrong tools and half a night of sleep. But when a standard 75mm Sherman met a Panther from the front, the numbers did not feel like courage. They felt like a wall. The Panther's long 75mm gun could kill Allied armor at ranges where many Allied crews were still trying to identify what they were looking at. Its sloped frontal plate made a straight-on shot feel almost insulting. Even when a Panther broke down, the Germans had recovery units trained to drag it back, replace the damaged parts, and return it to the line. A tank destroyed by fire was a loss. A tank immobilized in mud was a delay. But a tank with a ruined turret ring was something more useful. It was alive enough to consume men, fuel, transport, guards, spare parts, and workshop time, and dead enough to stop being a tank. That was the target. Not the engine, not the tracks, not the armor, the ring. The turret ring was the circular race of machined steel that allowed the turret to rotate. It had to be precise, smooth, and strong enough to carry tons of gun, armor, optics, ammunition, and men while still turning quickly toward a threat. To a crew, it was invisible. To an engineer, it was the hinge on which the whole machine's confidence moved. If that ring warped by even a fraction, the turret began to bind. If it bound under load, the traverse motor strained. If the motor strained long enough, teeth snapped, bearings scarred, and the turret became a locked room sitting on top of a running vehicle. The Allies could not easily reach it from outside. That was the point of the Panther. So a small team of British engineers asked a different question. What if outside was the wrong direction? The work was not done in a grand laboratory. It was done in a country house-turned-weapons shop, where men with slide rules and burnt cuffs learned to make impossible devices for people who would never be able to carry a proper weapon. The office name was Military Department 1. The soldiers had another name for it. They called it the place where bad ideas went to become useful. Major Millis Jefferis liked weapons that behaved like tricks until the moment they became engineering. Sticky bombs, limpet mines, concealed charges, firing devices that looked too simple to be dangerous. He was not trying to win tank battles in the normal way. He was trying to remove tanks from the board before the battle began. The first drawings for the device were almost embarrassing. A narrow heat charge, a friction-safe casing, a chemical delay, a shaped ceramic throat that forced the burn sideways instead of straight back toward the muzzle. The device was barely longer than a man's thumb. It could ride in a match tin, a tobacco pouch, or under the paper lining of a medical parcel. In the workshop log, it was given a sterile technical name. In the field, the men and women who carried it called it the pin, because it did not explode like a bomb. It pinned the turret shut. The action was simple enough to sound foolish. At night, an agent approached a parked tank. The muzzle was usually uncovered because gun barrels were not treated like doors. The agent placed the pin into the bore, nose first. Gravity and a small weighted sleeve carried it down the barrel until it seated near the breech. Then the agent walked away. 34 seconds later, the chemical delay ignited. The charge did not try to blow the tank apart. It burned. Thermite can reach temperatures above 2,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to turn steel from certainty into argument. The pin used that heat in a narrow lateral jet. The burn escaped through the breech gap and licked into the hidden space around the turret ring and traverse gear. No giant fireball. No heroic crater. Often, no sound loud enough to wake the far sentry. Just a violent local heat event inside the one precision area the tank could not afford to lose. When the metal cooled, it was no longer quite the same shape. That was enough. The first field-style test nearly killed the project. A captured German gun tube had been mounted at a coastal range under conditions meant to imitate a parked vehicle. A corporal who had never seen the device before was told only to drop it into the muzzle and step away. He dropped it too hard. The casing cracked. The burn ran backward and spat out of the barrel like a furnace coughing through a chimney. The device damaged the muzzle, missed the simulated ring housing, and left half the observers convinced the whole idea was a toy for madmen. Jeffress said nothing for a long time. Then he walked to the barrel, put a gloved finger near the scorch pattern, and asked for a ruler. That was why his people followed him. Failure did not embarrass him. It gave him dimensions. The second version used a stronger fiber casing and a tiny ceramic director that held shape long enough for the burn to go where it was supposed to go. On the next test, the observers did not see much. That was the beauty of it. A small hiss inside the breech, a breath of white smoke, a smell like burnt iron and wet stone. Then the Traverse crew tried to move the turret. It shifted 3 degrees and stopped. They brought in a power unit. The motor groaned. They tried hand traverse. The wheel did not answer. A mechanic crawled under the turret basket, came out with black dust on his cheek, and said the ring looked as if it had been hammered by invisible fists. That was the moment the pin became a weapon. Not because it made a spectacle, because it made a diagnosis. A German crew could look at the tank afterward and see no attacker. A German workshop could write bearing failure, bad machining, heat expansion, material defect. A German commander could blame the factory. And every hour they spent blaming the factory was an hour they were not guarding the barrel. By late summer, small packets began moving into occupied France through SOE routes. They did not travel in crates marked as weapons. They moved as medical items, sewing supplies, radio parts, religious pamphlets, spare fuses, anything ordinary enough to pass through the hands of people who had learned that fear was lighter when divided into small pieces. One packet reached a railway contact near Le Mans in a parcel that smelled of disinfectant and old paper. The contact was listed only by the letter R. The courier who helped place the first devices was listed only as Lucy. No surname survived in the file. Maybe that was deliberate. Maybe it was mercy. What survived was her method. She and another operator watched the repair yard for 2 nights before touching anything. They counted the sentry's circuit. They learned where the dog stopped to sniff. They learned which guard smoked and which one sang under his breath. On the 3rd night, after midnight, they crossed the wire at the coal shed. Lucy carried 6 pins wrapped in cloth under the false bottom of a bicycle tool roll. She did not run. Running creates shapes men notice. She walked as if she belonged to the dark. The first tank was a Panther with its barrel angled slightly downward, which made the job almost too easy. She pulled 1 pin free, felt the cold rim of the muzzle with 2 fingers, and slid the device inside. There was no click, no drama. Just the tiny sound of something disappearing into a tube built for killing at 1,000 meters. She moved to the 2nd tank, then the 3rd. At the 4th, the sentry turned too early. Lucy dropped flat under the side skirt of the vehicle and lay with one cheek against frozen mud while the man's boots passed close enough for her to smell the leather polish. The report she gave later was only 9 lines long. The last line said, "I did not breathe until he had gone." 34 seconds after the first pin seated, the first charge burned. The sentry heard nothing useful. Maybe he heard a tick of cooling metal. Maybe he heard the yard settling. Maybe he heard only the winter trees beyond the fence. By morning, 4 vehicles had turret trouble. By afternoon, the depot engineers were arguing about lubrication. By evening, a telegram was moving toward a factory inspector who had no idea he had become part of the sabotage. That was the genius of the weapon. It did not only damage machines, it damaged explanation. The Germans had a system for shells. They had a system for mines. They had a system for air attack, partisan bombs, cut rail lines, missing fuel, stolen documents, and murdered collaborators. But a perfectly guarded vehicle with a dead turret ring looked like betrayal by metal itself. And metal did not confess. Reports began to cluster. A Panther at a forward repair site outside Chartres. Turret locked after no combat damage. A Sturmgeschütz near Angers. Breach heat marks. Unexplained traverse failure. 2 vehicles in a rail yard near Tours. No external blast, ring distortion, suspected manufacturing fault. The first investigation looked backward toward German factories. That was exactly the wrong direction. Inspectors questioned workers. Commanders complained about bearing tolerances. Workshop officers requested replacement rings. Sentries were told to watch fences, gates, fuel dumps, radios, and tool sheds. Almost nobody was told to watch the muzzle, until the crews began to do it themselves. A tank crew is trained to trust certain things: armor, Gun, engine, orders. When the gun barrel itself becomes a possible entrance for an unseen enemy, trust begins to fracture. Men started running rags through barrels before moving out. They shined torches down bores in the dark. They argued about whether a barrel plug was worth the extra delay. Some crews improvised canvas covers. Others demanded sentries at the front of parked vehicles instead of only at the perimeter. Every inspection took minutes. Every minute mattered. A Panther that took 5 extra minutes to leave a depot did not vanish from history. It merely arrived late. And war is full of moments where late is another word for absent. The pin was never going to defeat the Panzerwaffe by itself. That would be the wrong story. It was not a wonder weapon. It was subtraction. One turret here, one repair team there. One commander forced to hold a vehicle back because nobody trusted the traverse. One investigation pointed toward a factory instead of a fence line. One crew beginning its morning by looking into its own gun barrel instead of looking outward for the enemy. That was how a device lighter than a house key earned its value. Not by destroying the biggest thing in the field. By making the biggest thing doubt the one opening it could not close. In the weeks before the Normandy landings, the German armored system in northern France was already strained. Fuel was guarded. Rail movement was dangerous. Spare parts were uneven. Recovery vehicles were overworked. Workshops were overloaded with machines that had been damaged, cannibalized, misrouted, or simply worn down by a war that had stopped being generous. The pin did not create that pressure. It entered the pressure like grit in a bearing, too small to honor, too small to fear properly, too small at first to explain. And because it was small, it could travel through the occupied world in ways a bomb never could, in the lining of a basket, under a doctor's bandage roll, inside a hollowed brush handle, in the pocket of a woman who looked to a careless sentry, like someone with nothing dangerous to carry. That was his mistake. Return to Major Mertens in the repair park west of Lisieux. He is standing with his collar turned up against the cold, looking at 3 Panthers that appear ready for war until the moment war asks them to turn. A mechanic has opened an inspection plate. Another man has found heat marks where no heat should have been. Someone mentions the factory. Someone else says sabotage, but with the tone of a man trying not to sound superstitious. Mertens looks at the long black mouth of the gun barrel and understands, too late, that the tank's strength has been misread. The armor was never the whole problem. The gun was not only a weapon, it was a passage. His report moves through the German system with a new warning attached. Cover muzzles when parked. Inspect barrels before movement. Watch for small foreign objects. By then, the warning is chasing a weapon that has already done its best work. Because the true damage was not just the seized ring. It was the change in behavior. It was the torch in the barrel. The extra guard at the muzzle. The crew's hesitation. The mechanic blaming the factory. The commander waiting for a replacement assembly that did not arrive. The map marker that should have moved that morning and did not. A great tank is built to survive the front. Its armor faces outward. Its doctrine faces outward. Its crew searches outward. But the pin turned the question inward. What if the safest machine in the yard had already been entered? What if the enemy did not need to break the door? What if the keyhole was enough? The surviving names are few. The documents are incomplete. Some packets were used and never recorded. Some operators died with their routes still secret. Some repair logs described the effect without ever knowing the cause. But somewhere in those missing spaces, a woman lay under a German tank with frozen mud against her face, holding her breath while a device smaller than a finger began to burn inside a weapon built to dominate roads, villages, and battlefields. The Panther remained armored. The turret did not move. The door stayed shut. The keyhole was enough.